I've watched how they interact with Iowans. I've watched how they answer hard questions. And there's one that stands out. And I'm officially announcing today that I've made my decision for who I intend to caucus for on January 15th, and that person is Nikki Haley. And if you're undecided, I invite you to listen today, ask questions today. That's what this is all about. This process of the Iowa caucus is beautiful. We all get to ask questions. We get to use our voice. And next summer, we'll know who the nominee is, and we're all going to come together, and we're going to take the country back. So with that, please welcome the next President of the United States, Ambassador Nikki Haley.
What a way to start the morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the support. Boy, do you have it good with Brett. I mean, he is such a good one. We've known each other for a while now. It's great to be back here in Nevada. You know, big funny thing, the first time I was in Nevada, by the way, it was snowing the first time I came. And I did some video and said, I'm here in Nevada, and all of my opponents started hitting me saying, she said it wrong, she said it wrong. For the record, I had it right. It is Nevada, it is not Nevada. But it's great to be back. Thank you for taking the time to be here. How many of you are hearing me for the first time at a town hall? Now, where have y'all been? Welcome, welcome. We're glad to have you. You know, I was born and raised in a small rural town in South Carolina. 2,500 people, 2 stoplights. You couldn't think about doing something wrong without somebody already telling your mom. I grew up playing on a cotton field and at a dairy farm. And so when I see these farms out here, it reminds me of home. My mom started a business out of the living room of our home. 30 plus years later, it was a successful company. I started doing the books for the family business when I was 13. It wasn't until I got to college that I realized that was child labor. I am not an Ivy Leaguer. I went to a public university. I went to Clemson University, go Tigers, and I graduated with a degree in accounting. Accountants are problem solvers. No offense to any lawyers in the room. And then I went on and worked in the corporate world for a while. And then I came back home to the family business. And one day I happened to be telling my mom how hard it was to make $1 and how easy it was for government to take it. And my mom said, quit complaining about it, do something about it. I truly did not know you weren't supposed to run against a 30-year incumbent in a primary. Tigers, I love that. But once I realized he was related to half the district, the only option was to win. So I went around the district and said, we have way too many lawyers at the State House. I think it's time we finally have an accountant. The district took a chance on me and we won. When I got to the State House, my focus was on small businesses. I think small businesses are the heartbeat of our economy. If you take care of our small businesses, you take care of a lot of things. And so I did those fights. And 3 or 4 years in, something happened. Now, South Carolina typically voted on legislation by a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. But one day, they pushed through a bill that would give legislators a pay raise. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, silence. The ayes have it, yet to this day you can't find anyone that says they voted themselves a pay raise. I was furious because we had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. So I filed a bill that said anything important enough to be debated on the floor of the House or the Senate is important enough for the people to know how their legislators voted. And the Speaker of the House said, put the bill away. We don't need to have it. We will decide what the public needs to see and what they don't. Long story short, when I wouldn't put the bill away, when I went around all of South Carolina letting them know what was going on, they stripped me of everything. I lost my committee assignments. I lost my seniority. I could sponsor a bill, no one would co-sponsor. I could take the well, no one would listen. So I ran for governor. I ran as the Tea Party candidate, and I'm proud to say one of the first bills we signed into law is now in South Carolina. Anything important enough to be debated on the floor of the House or the Senate requires a legislative vote on the record. And we took it a step further and we did it on every section of the budget as well. And I love music. You were listening to my playlist earlier. And so on the day of the bill signing, we blasted throughout the State House, Pat Benatar's Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Now, when I became governor, South Carolina was hurting. We had 11% unemployment. We had thousands of people on welfare. And South Carolina was the butt of the jokes. So we got to work. By the time I left, we were building planes with Boeing. We were building more BMWs than any place in the world. We brought in Mercedes-Benz. We brought in Volvo. 5 international tire companies. They were referring to us as the beast of the Southeast, which I still love. We announced jobs in every county in the state. And we moved that 11% unemployment down to 4%. And we acknowledged some truths. We said if you have to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, if you have to show picture ID to get on a plane, you should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process. And we passed voter ID in South Carolina. We passed one of the toughest illegal immigration laws in the country. We passed tort reform. We moved thousands of people from welfare to work. We paid down our debt. We built up our coffers. We reformed our system. And by the time I left, South Carolina was named the friendliest state in the country, the most patriotic state in the country, and the #2 state in the country people were moving to. And then I got the call for the United Nations. And my honest answer was, I don't even know what the UN does. I just know everybody hates it. I wasn't wrong about that. But when I got there, I wanted countries to know what America was for and what America was against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. So we got to work. We pulled ourselves out of the Iran deal. We moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We got out of the Paris Climate Agreement. We stopped any taxpayer money going to the Palestinian Refugee Organization. We pushed China, and I negotiated with China to pass the largest set of sanctions against a country in a generation against North Korea to get them to stop testing ballistic missiles. But the most important thing that we did, we took the kick me sign off of our backs, and America was respected again at the UN. Now I'm running for president, and I don't need to tell you how bad things are. You don't have to turn on the news to see it. You feel it when you go into the grocery store. You feel it when you fill up your car with gas. You feel it when you make your mortgage payment, your insurance payments. Everything that we have to have has gone up. And I would love to tell you that Biden did that to us. And he sent us down this roller coaster of socialism that's dangerous, that has to stop. But I've always spoken in hard truths, and I'm going to do that with you today. Our Republicans did that to us too. You go look at that $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill that they passed with no accountability, that expanded welfare, that has now left us with 100 million Americans on Medicaid, 42 million Americans on food stamps. That's a third of our country. And did Republicans try and make it right? No. They doubled down and opened up earmarks and pet projects for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them last year. Want to know how they spent your money? $30 million on an honors college in Vermont, $10 million to tear down a hotel in Alaska, $7.5 million on a courthouse in Colorado. And the list goes on. In the 2024 appropriations budget, Republicans put in $7.4 billion worth of pet projects and earmarks. Democrats put in $2.8 billion. Now you tell me who the big spenders are. All while 1 in 6 American families can't afford their utility bill. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 50% of American families can't afford diapers. Homelessness has gone up over 12%. We have over 650,000 people who are homeless now. Social Security will go bankrupt in 10 years. Medicare will go bankrupt in 8. You look at our education system. Everybody wants to blame COVID for education. We had problems with education before COVID. Do you know right now in America, 31% of 8th graders in our country are not proficient. Only 31% of 8th graders in America are proficient in reading. Only 31%. Only 27% of 8th graders are proficient in math. If we don't do something, we're going to be in a world of hurt 10 years from now. And then you look at the situation on the border. I've truly lost the words on what to say about that. It is a complete dereliction of duty. The idea that America's acting like it's September 10th, we'd better remember what September 12th felt like. It only takes one. Now, I've been to the border, and I didn't pull a Kamala, go and come back. I went 400 miles down that border. You're not ready for what I saw. Mounds of shoes, mounds of clothes, paraphernalia, rape areas that the women and girls have to walk through. When you get up in the morning, you get your coffee and you watch the news. When these ranchers get up in the morning, they get their coffee and they go see if anybody died crossing the fence. They pick up whatever little kids were left behind and they turn them over to Border Patrol. I met with multiple sheriffs. They said before 7 a.m. they round up whatever illegal immigrants they can find. They turn them over to Border Patrol. Border Patrol documents them and releases them until their court date years from now. And when I asked Border Patrol about their job, they said, you want to know what we do? We're glorified babysitters. They don't let us do our job. 8 million illegal immigrants have come to that border. We had more fentanyl cross the border last year that would kill every single American. Number 1 cause of death for adults 18 to 45, fentanyl. And don't think for a second China doesn't know what they're doing when they send it over. And then my parents always taught me, you take care of those who take care of you. I'm going to ask you if we're taking care of those who take care of us. Right now in America, 35,000 veterans are homeless that we know of. 1 in 3 suffers from PTSD or thoughts of suicide. We lose 22 heroes a day to suicide. If a veteran needs a doctor's appointment, on average, it takes 29 days. Why 29 days? Because on the 30th day, they can go to the doctor or hospital of their choice. So midway through the 29 days, they get a call to reschedule. And the clock starts all over again. It's shameful how we treat our veterans. Now you see, you can turn on the TV, and are you seeing Congress do anything for you? No. All they do is peacock on TV and they get nothing done. Don't you think it's time we finally had term limits in America? Don't you think we need to have mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 75? Now listen, I'm not being disrespectful when I say that. We all know people who can run circles around us that are over 75. I mean, Senator Grassley's a perfect example of that, right? And one Senator Grassley fan here. But then we know Joe Biden. I don't care if you do mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 50. But these are people making decisions on our national security. These are people making decisions on the future of our economy. Right now, the Senate's the most privileged nursing home in the country. We got to get this right. So that's a lot of bad, right? It's hard to find anything good. But now I'm going to tell you what I told South Carolinians when I became governor. No more whining. No more complaining. Now we get to work. How do we fix it? Let's start with the economy. We start by clawing back to over $100 billion of unspent COVID dollars that are still out there. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents going after middle America, let's go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud, 1 out of every $7. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing. Cut up the credit cards. You have to balance a budget every day. I had to balance a budget as governor. Why is Congress the only group that refuses to balance a budget? Their one job is to make sure they pay for government. Do you know Congress has only delivered a budget on time 4 times in 40 years? 4 times in 40 years. When I'm president, you don't deliver a budget on time, you don't get paid. We've got to put an end to that.
I like that.
We will stop the spending, we'll stop the borrowing, we'll end the earmarks, and I will veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre-COVID levels. That will save us trillions. Then we will go and take as many federal programs as we can and push them down to the states. That will reduce the size of the federal government, and it will empower people on the ground. Think welfare, think healthcare, think education. Those are things that you could actually have a control on instead of some bureaucrats in DC. Do you know right now, 70% of federal employees are still working from home 3 years after COVID? Do you know 75% of most of our federal agencies are still sitting empty? We're paying for that. Something's got to give. And then we need to give some breathing room to the middle class. We are watching the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's why I will go and eliminate the federal gas and diesel tax in this country. We will cut taxes on the middle class and simplify those brackets. And we will make small business tax cuts permanent. They made them temporary. They made corporate tax cuts permanent. When you make small business tax cuts permanent, that's when you're really focusing on the inner core and soul of our economy. Then, when it comes to education, we knew in South Carolina if a child couldn't read by 3rd grade, they were 4 times less likely to graduate high school. So we stopped pushing them forward and we started holding them back if they couldn't read. We brought in their parents. We did reading remediation programs with them, and we set them up for success. We've got to do that all over our country. We have got to get our kids reading again. And no parent should ever wonder what's being said or taught to their child in the classroom. We need complete transparency in the classroom. As parents, we have one job, and that's to make sure we get our kids right. That's why every parent should be able to decide how their child gets educated. Every child deserves a good education, regardless of where they're born and raised. Stop making kids go to a school based on their zip code, and let their parents decide the best way to educate them. And then let's start building things in America again.
Yeah.
Let's put vocational classes back into our high schools. We had apprenticeships all over South Carolina. We taught our kids how to build the things we were making. That way we got them invested in our economy before they were even done. And as a point of personal privilege, to all you girl dads out there and all you strong moms, we have to raise strong girls. Strong girls become strong women. Strong women become strong leaders. None of that happens if you have biological boys playing in girls' sports. We've got to put an end to that. And then when it comes to the border, we will take what I did in South Carolina and we'll go national with it. We will do a national E-Verify program that requires businesses to prove that the people they hire are in this country legally. We will defund sanctuary cities once and for all and get rid of these safe havens that are happening in America. We will put 25,000 Border Patrol and ICE agents on the ground and let them do their job. And we will go back to the Remain in Mexico policy so that everybody has to process in Mexico and never steps foot on U.S. soil. And instead of catch and release, we'll go to catch and deport. That's the only way we're going to secure our border, but we have to get that done. And then when it comes to our veterans, we've all seen images when our men and women deploy and the tears they're shed. And then we see the images, God willing, when our men and women come back home to us safely. and the prayers that are answered. I'm the wife of a combat veteran. He deployed to Afghanistan. The day he came home to us was a lot of prayers answered. But that was the easy part. When we got home, life got hard. Michael couldn't hear loud noises. He couldn't be in crowds. Life had passed him by for the year that he was gone, and the transition was tough. We can't just love our men and women when they're gone. We gotta love them when they come back home too. We have to do better than just a 2-week transition. We've got to make sure we're keeping an eye on them throughout their life. Let's do telehealth so that they get the mental health care they need right when they need it. Let's let them go to the doctor or hospital of their choice. They've earned that right. And I think if there's an issue with veterans' health care, I think the best way we take care of it is every member of Congress should have to get their health care from the VA. And you watch how fast they can. The best health care you've ever seen, guaranteed. And there were 2 things that Russia, China, and Iran never wanted us to have when I was at the United Nations. They never wanted us to have a strong military, and they never wanted us to be energy independent. We won't just be energy independent, we will be energy dominant. We have got to turn our energy sector into an economic powerhouse. That includes biofuels. We should be doing anything and everything we can to make sure that we speed up our permitting process, speed up, get the Keystone Pipeline, make sure that we get the EPA out of the way. Right now, the EPA cares more about sagebrush lizards than they do about whether Americans can afford their utility bill. Let's export as much liquefied natural gas as we can. And let's support our farmers in helping in this process. And yes, that includes the renewable fuel standard. Let's keep it strong and make sure no more going hat in hand to Saudi Arabia, no more getting dirty oil from Iran and Venezuela. That's the best way to take on our enemies. So we have the answers on the domestic side. Now let's talk about national security. The world is on fire. And that's not exaggerating. You've got a war in Europe. You've got a war in the Middle East. You've got North Korea just tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. You've got China on the march. But make no mistake, none of that would have happened had we not had that debacle in Afghanistan. The idea that my husband and his military brothers and sisters had to watch us leave Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what that said to our enemies. And now what are you hearing from Congress? Congress is coming to you and saying, should we support Ukraine or should we support Israel? Should we support Israel or should we secure the border? Don't let them lie to you like that. That's wrong. That is a false premise. Let's take it one by one. Let's start with Ukraine. You should know at the United Nations, they were a great friend to us. They voted with us on almost everything. They supported every agenda item we had without us even asking. Here you have this pro-American, freedom-loving country that was invaded by a thug, and 500,000 people have died because of Putin. I don't think we should ever give cash to any country because you can't follow it. I don't think we put troops on the ground in Ukraine. They don't want our troops. They want to win this on their own. What they're asking for is the equipment and ammunition to win. Now, Putin has hit rock bottom. We know that. He's lost 87% of the troops that started this war. They've raised the draft age in Russia to 65. Everybody always looks around when I say that. They're getting their drones from Iran and missiles from North Korea. Putin knew he was in trouble. But it's a legitimate question to say, why should we care about Ukraine? That's a valid question. The reason we care about Ukraine, I saw this every day at the United Nations. Every terrorist and thug and dictator, they always tell us exactly what they're going to do. They're actually very transparent. Hamas said they were going to invade Israel. China said they were going to take Hong Kong. They did. Russia said they were going to invade Ukraine. We watched them. China says Taiwan is next. We better believe them. Russia said once they take Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. Those are NATO countries. That puts America at war. Now, you'll find my opponents will sit there and say, she's a warmonger. No, I'm preventing war. This is all about prevention of war. Trust me, as the spouse of a military veteran, the last thing you want is your loved ones to go to war. And remember, before the Olympics, Russia and China held hands and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. So if we decided to support Ukraine, that's only 3.5% of our defense budget. That's it. The Europeans are paying more than that, and they should. It's their neighborhood. Now let's talk about Israel. I'm haunted by what happened on October 7th. And the reason I'm haunted is because 5 years ago, I gave a speech to the entire world at the United Nations and told them that we knew of maps. These maps were held by Hamas, and they showed that if they broke the barrier, this is how they were going to kill as many Jews as fast as they could. And it happened. Israel has always been the tip of the spear when it comes to defeating terrorism. They're a bright spot in a tough neighborhood. It has never been that Israel needs America. It has always been that America needs Israel. And God help us if we don't get this right. Because think about what happened. On that day, when they beheaded those people and burned those babies alive, and raped those girls at that concert and dragged their naked bodies through the streets of Gaza, what did they say? Death to Israel, death to America. There would be no Hamas without Iran. There would not be Hezbollah without Iran. You wouldn't have the Houthis without Iran. So if we took care of Ukraine and Israel, that's 5% of our defense budget. But let me give you something else to think about. Remember when I told you Putin had hit rock bottom? When Hamas committed those brutal acts on October 7th, October 7th is Putin's birthday. Who's the happiest person in the world right now? Putin. Why? Because America and the West took our eyes off of Ukraine and moved it to Israel. Did Putin call Netanyahu when that happened? No. He didn't call Netanyahu for 10 days. You know who he called? Hamas, and invited them to come to Russia. And they did, and they named themselves friends. We now know it was Russian intelligence that was given to Hamas to let them know how to break that barrier. Don't ever forget that connection. Now, securing our border should be priority number one. Without question, we have to protect America's borders. That is the number one role as national security. And if you can't protect your own borders, you don't have national security. So if we supported Israel, and we supported Ukraine, and we secured our border, that's less than 20% of Biden's green subsidies. So don't let them tell you that you have to choose. They have to choose national security. They have to choose protecting America. And the only way we do that is if we make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent war. Now, we haven't talked about the number one national security threat, China. China's been planning war with us for years. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. They're already here. They've infiltrated our country. They've purchased 400,000 acres of U.S. soil, most recently near Grand Forks Air Force Base, where our most sensitive drone technology is. They've poured millions of dollars into our universities, stealing our research, spreading Chinese propaganda. Everybody got upset when the Chinese spy balloon went overhead, rightfully so. What about the fact that 90% of our law enforcement drones in America are Chinese? Now look at all the mini surveillance that's happening. There are certain technologies that we never want China to have because it builds up their military and it threatens America. Yet the Biden administration approved 70% of it last year. The Trump administration approved more than that. And we've had more Americans die of fentanyl than the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam wars combined. Over 75,000 Americans last year lost their lives to fentanyl. And then China's building up their military at a scary pace. They now have 500 nuclear warheads. That's 100 more than they had last year. They have the largest naval fleet in the world. They have 370 ships. They'll have 400 in 2 years. We won't even have 350 ships in 2 decades. They're doing artificial intelligence, they're doing cyber, they're doing space. They've developed hypersonic missiles. We've barely gotten started. And now China's the lead developer on neurostrike weapons. Weapons engineered to change the brain activity of military commanders and segments of the population. So don't let Biden and Yellen tell you that China's a competitor. Every day I dealt with China at the United Nations. They never saw us as a competitor. They always saw us as an enemy. We have to start looking at them the way they look at us. So how do we deal with China? First, stop the sale of any U.S. soil and let's take back the land they already purchased. We'll go to our universities and we'll say you either take foreign money or you take American money, but the days of taking both are over. We get that infiltration out of our universities. We will go to China and say we're going to end all normal trade relations with you until you stop murdering Americans with fentanyl. You watch how fast they move because they need our economy. And then we'll focus on blacklisting all of that technology that builds up their military and threatens America. And when it comes to our military, strong militaries don't start wars. Strong militaries prevent wars. Let's strengthen our military. And that doesn't mean throwing money at the Department of Defense. It actually means first cleaning it up. Get rid of the red tape. Get rid of the bureaucracy. Get rid of all these programs they have no business being involved in. I mean, for goodness sake, stop the gender pronoun classes. It's demoralizing our military. We've got generals focused on wars of the past, land, air, and sea. Let's start focusing on artificial, on space, on cyber. Let's develop hypersonic missiles. Let's look at our submarine stockpiles. Those are the things we should be looking at. When you do that, that's when your enemies get on their heels. That's what they fear the most. So now to make that connection, there's a reason the Taiwanese want the U.S. and the West to support Ukraine. Because they know if Ukraine wins, China will never invade Taiwan. There's a reason the Ukrainians want us to support the Israelis. Because they know if Russia wins, Iran wins. Iran, China, and Russia are connected with an unholy alliance that is bonded by the fact that they hate freedom, they hate the West, and most of all, they hate America. It's time for us to get this right. But the only way we're going to get this right is if we stop this national self-loathing that's taken over our country. The idea that people say America's bad or rotten or racist. I was elected the first female minority governor in history. America's not racist, we're blessed. Our kids need to know to love America. They need to be saying the Pledge of Allegiance when they start school every day. You know, 5 months ago, I dropped my husband Michael off at 4 a.m. for another year-long deployment. And I watched him and 230 soldiers pick up their 2 duffel bags of belongings to go to a country they'd never been, all in the name of protecting America. They're willing to sacrifice their lives and their families because they still believe in this amazing experiment that is America. So if they're willing to fight for us there, shouldn't we be willing to fight for America here? Because we have a country to save. But in order to do that, we've got to acknowledge some hard truths. Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. That is nothing to be proud of. We should want to win the majority of Americans. But the only way that's going to happen is if we have a new generational leader. Someone who leaves the negativity and the baggage behind and starts focusing on the real issues that face us going forward. Another hard truth. I think President Trump was the right president at the right time. I had a good working relationship with him. I agree with a lot of his policies. But rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him. And we can't have a country in disarray and a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos. You don't defeat Democrat chaos with Republican chaos. Do you remember when you were growing up? And I see some younger ones, I can say this too. Remember how safe life felt? Remember how simple it was? It was about faith, family, and country. Your parents raised you to be responsible individuals. You went to school and you learned what you needed to be successful. You went to church and you found your faith and your conscience. Don't you want that again? Because we could have that again. But in order to do that, it's going to take a lot of courage. Courage from every single person in this room. Courage for me to run. And courage from every one of you to know, don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't play in this caucus. The media loves to show you those national polls, right? Iowans know those national polls don't mean a thing. Because at the end of the day, who starts this? Iowa. Who leads the charge? Iowa. In every one of those general election polls that they've been showing of head-to-head against Biden, which is what we better remember, because a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. And God help us if we get a President Kamala Harris. Every one of those polls, Trump is up. It's pretty much even. On a good day, he's up by 2. Wall Street Journal had him up by 4. That's margin of error. DeSantis doesn't beat Biden at all. In every one of those polls, I defeat Biden by double digits. The Wall Street Journal, I beat him by 17 points. Do you know what that means for us? That's not just about the presidency. That's about winning governorships. That's about winning the House. That's about winning the Senate. That's about winning school board seats. That's top to bottom. But that is a mandate going into Washington. That's a mandate to say no more, bless you, no more spending and getting our economy back on track. That's a mandate to get our kids reading again. That's a mandate to secure the borders once and for all. That's a mandate to make sure we have law and order back in this country. And that's a mandate for a strong America that makes every one of us proud. You know, when I announced, everyone asked, why are you doing this? And I said, 50 years ago, my parents came. to an America that was strong and proud and full of opportunities. I want them to know that country again. I'm doing this for my husband, Michael, and his military brothers and sisters. They need to know their sacrifice matters. They need to know that we love our country. I'm doing this for my daughter who just got married, and I saw how hard it was for her and her husband to buy a home. And I'm doing this for my son, who's a senior in college. And I am tired of watching him worry about writing papers of things he doesn't believe in just to get an A. That is not America. And for the first time in America, 81% of Americans don't think their kids are going to have as good of a life as we have. We can't be okay with that. I'm not okay with that. We do have a country to save. But I'll say this. If you join me in this fight, I promise you, our best days are yet to come. Thank you very much. Make a Southern girl feel good. I appreciate that. But I'll say I do want to add a couple of things. We're going to open it up for questions and answer whatever you want to talk about. But I want to say this. I have seen all of the commercials that you're seeing. And if you punch me, I punch back. Ron DeSantis has lied in every one of his commercials. They've been fact-checked. There's a reason they don't stay up for very long. Anyone from CNN to Newsmax has all said that these are wrong. If he's going to lie about me, I'm going to tell the truth about him. Ron DeSantis led the charge in Congress to ban the renewable fuel standards. Ron DeSantis in Florida banned fracking, banned offshore drilling, and was praised by the Sierra Club. And then Ron DeSantis, who says Ukraine's a territorial dispute and that this is Israel's war, not America's war, turns around and brings in a Republican into Iowa that is the most anti-Israel Republican there is, who voted with the squad against calling out anti-Semitism on college campuses, voted with the squad against hitting the presidents that were allowing it to happen, and voted with the squad, the only Republican, to turn around and ban the fact that we shouldn't give $6 billion to Iran for 5 hostages. That's who he brought to Iowa. So let him answer for that. But I'll say this, if you've got to go out and tell lies about someone to win, you don't deserve to win. It's that simple. But I'm going to keep telling you the truth because that's what we need to do. So now we're going to open it up for questions. There's nothing I won't answer. You may not like my answer, but there's nothing I won't answer. We have 1 or 2?
2 mics.
2 mics. Just raise your hand high, they'll come to you.
Sir.
Yes, sir. And yes, go Tigers. I appreciate that.
Hey, my name is Steve Cohen. First, my cousin who's in Beaufort, who you put on the nursing board, Barry Lips, said I had to tell you hi if I got a chance to talk to you.
Tell him I said hello.
Okie doke. Anyway, I'm a general internist. Work with a older group of patients on Medicare who struggle to pay for their medicines despite having Medicare drug insurance. I saw the struggles on a professional level when a patient was about to cry. She said, well, I had to choose between my mortgage and my medicine. So I'm giving up my house to the bank and I'm moving in with relatives. And I saw it on a personal level when I was talking to an oncologist about the medicine for my mom's lung cancer, which the insurance didn't cover. That was $79,000 a year. That's a common situation. 25% of people skip at least some of their medicines because of the cost. And I was going to make a suggestion on how you could walk out the door and fix that starting today if you want to. I sat him in front of a computer and I showed him a really underpublicized resource on the Medicare Gov website called Medicare Plan Finder. In 3 minutes, I pulled up the website, I used the tool, I put in her name and her medicines and her zip code, and I got a report showing what the out-of-pocket costs for all the insurance plans for her medicines were in the Atlanta area at the time. There were 50 plans. The most expensive was hers. It didn't cover it, $79,000 a year. The least expensive was $6,600 a year, which is a lot of money, but it's obviously a lot less. This is terribly underpublicized. I've given talks on this to about 1,000 doctors in multiple venues. Nobody knows about it. If you do the statistics, the average person could save $400 to $500 a year on their medicines. You were talking about the earmarks costing $10 billion a year. If you do the $400 by the 70 million people in Medicare, you're talking about $24 billion a year in annual savings. You're talking about the veterans. If you look at the vets on Medicare, you could save over $2 billion a year. People don't know about this.
Huff, get the website from him. Make sure that we write that down. You know, when it comes to healthcare, this is personal for me because my husband and I take care of my parents. They live with us. And when you look at healthcare in America, how can we be the best country in the world with the most expensive healthcare in the world? It doesn't make sense. And that's why we're going to open the entire thing up. I want to see everything. We're going to make it all transparent, from the insurance companies to the hospitals, to the doctors, to the pharmaceutical companies, to the PBMs, everything in between. Show us everything. Because we're not going to pick on one part of it. We're going to look at all of it. Because when my mom was in the hospital, a nurse came over and said, here's 2 Tylenol. And my mom said, I don't need it, I'm fine. And she said, honey, you might as well take it, you're paying for them anyway. When we got the bill, no one talked to us about that bill. No one. Why? Because the hospital and the insurance company negotiated for us. We've got to get the patient out of the back seat and do it the right way. It is time for us to figure out how to put the patient in the driver's seat. If we just dealt with insurance companies alone, we'd cut healthcare in half. So if we open it up, think about when you go to get your car fixed, you go to the mechanic. The mechanic says, well, I can do a temporary fix, it's going to cost you this much. Or I can give you the full permanent fix, and it's going to cost you this much. But you decide. We should be part of that conversation. When we open it up and make them show us their warts, then we get to start calling out exactly what they're doing that's wrong. That's when we start to get into the driver's seat. That's when we start to say, why are we having to buy medicines from Canada? That's when we start saying, why do seniors, I mean, if you look right now, Medicare, my dad has cancer. He needs a lot of help. Medicare won't even send a nurse to our house to help him, like to do anything. And so we're trying to figure out how to figure out what he has, what he doesn't have. No one can work through this complexity that is our healthcare system. And I have learned in my life, from whether legislators vote on the record to putting how much Congress spends online, transparency fixes everything. And watch out, healthcare industry, because we're about to make you completely transparent so that we can see exactly what's happening. That's how we'll do it. They're coming to you, sir.
Very comfortable. We have an amazing transportation system in this country, albeit one that always needs a lot of work. I believe that we need to pay for services received. How can we maintain our transportation system if we get rid of the gas tax revenues?
First of all, if you look at the way we deal with the gas tax of taking it from the state, putting it in the feds, and then bringing it back to you, it is so piecemeal. We're not taking care of infrastructure now as we speak. And this goes back to, look at the green subsidies that Biden passed. He wants everybody to have an electric car by 2030, 2035, right? One, electric cars are very expensive, but we don't even have the infrastructure. If we were to do that, and I'm not talking about charging stations, electric vehicles are extremely heavy. Our roads and bridges wouldn't be able to handle it if you had all electric cars on them. But infrastructure should be a priority. Roads, bridges, ports, rail, all of those things should be a priority. They all need to be updated. That's why we need to make sure there is a certain part of the budget that completely deals with infrastructure. You send it to the state and let the state decide priority-wise what they think they need to have. That's what we need to do. Right now, these pennies that go back and forth, by the time they hit DC and come back to you, they've spent a lot of money. And I saw as a governor, when we wanted to get a road done, we had to deal with DC, we had to deal with the environmental agency, we had to deal with everyone else, that by the time you actually got to do the road, it was 7 years later, and the cost had gone way up, and then you couldn't afford that. We can't have it continue to go through this process. If we're going to really turn our infrastructure around, you've got to streamline that, and you have to have a certain pool of money that's not dependent on a gas tax, that says this is how we're going to go take care of our roads, our bridges, our ports, our rail, and make sure that we get it modernized back up to speed. That's the way we'll deal with it. Yes, sir. Nice sweatshirt.
I have two questions. I think easy. Why did you quit with the ambassadorship? And do you know Christy Nolan? What do you think of her?
So in terms of the UN, you know, it's funny because my opponents are like, oh, she left after 2 years. Well, if you go into the United Nations, if you look on the wall, they have the ambassadors, and it tells you like the year they started, the year they served. On average, a UN ambassador serves 2 years. But what does that say about our society? That they think the longer you stay, the better it is. When I was at the United Nations, we pulled ourselves out of the Iran deal. We voted for the first time to name Hamas a terrorist organization. We negotiated 4 different sets of sanctions with China and Russia to get North Korea to stop ballistic missile testing. We moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I was the first one in 2 decades that was able to get an arms embargo done on South Sudan. There were multiple things we got done. But when you've accomplished what you need to accomplish, the best thing is to know when to walk away and let someone else come in. That's why you do it. You don't do it because you want to stay forever. You do it because you go in, you do your job, and then you know when to leave. And I think that was really important. So we got a lot done. But if you look at the ambassadors, on average, that's how long they stay, is 2 years, because you're up all night waiting for those international countries to come back through. You're working 7 days a week to get it done. And I was proud of the work that we did. But I do want to tell you one thing that we did at the UN that I will use going forward. When we were condemned by the entire world for moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, I was mad. And I was mad because the US can put our embassy wherever we want. We've always put it in the capital of every country. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and we were acknowledging a truth. But I went back to my office, and I said, I want you to put a book together. And I want you to list all 193 countries at the UN. I want the second column to be the percentage of times they voted with the US and against the US. And I want the third column to be how much foreign aid we gave them. I took that book and I gave it to President Trump. He lost his mind. He's flipping out pages, he's yelling out countries. And what I said to him is, I'm not saying you give foreign aid based on a percentage vote at the UN, but that should be one of the things we look at. Quit trying to buy friends. Quit paying off enemies. Do you know last year we gave $50 billion in foreign aid? You know who we gave it to? Iraq, who harbored terrorists that tried to kill our soldiers. Zimbabwe, the most anti-American African country out there. Belarus, who's holding hands with Russia against Ukraine. We gave money to Cuba, who we named a state sponsor of terrorism, who's putting up a spy base against us right now. And we gave them money. And the one that makes me sick to my stomach, we gave money to China. How weak do we look? When I am president, we will no longer give money to countries that hate America, period. And in terms of Christy, you know, I called Christy during COVID because she was getting hit on the fact that she had kept South Dakota open. And I told her how proud we were and how to keep on fighting and that there were a lot of people behind her. And I think she's been a great governor.
I just think the two of you would make a good team.
So noted. So noted. Yes, sir.
Sure. I have kind of a two-part question. As an academic, freedom of speech and also academic freedom is something very important. But as the husband of a Jewish woman, I've also seen a lot of this anti-Semitism and a lot of the, you know, not exactly great things going on in our broader society. How do you balance these two very important competing values?
So when it comes to anti-Semitism, your wife knows this has been bubbling up for a while. October 7th just brought it to the forefront, right? But let's look at what's happening on those college campuses. The first thing we have to acknowledge is you heard me talk about Chinese money going into our universities. There's a lot of Arab money going into our universities. So there's no surprise that we had pro-Hamas protests at all on the college campuses. That is why it's so important that we tell our universities, stop taking foreign money. The second thing is we should get rid of all those lobbyists that lobby for foreign countries to our members of Congress. That's what ambassadors are for. We should not have anyone lobbying our members of Congress for another government. Then we look at our social media. There is a reason I'm saying we have to ban TikTok. Because if you look at the pro-Hamas reels that started immediately after that happened, think about what that did to disrupt, socially disrupt. There is a reason India banned TikTok, because they said it was causing social disruption. There's a reason Nepal, just a couple of months ago, banned TikTok, because it was causing social disruption. TikTok just put up, shortly after, the letter from Osama bin Laden justifying why he did what he did on 9/11. And so you've got all these young people saying, oh, that's why he did it. That's disgusting. But that's not Americans doing that to us. That's our foreign adversaries doing that to us. Now let's talk about the rest of social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those. When social media first started, it was very focused on freedom of speech. I will always fight for freedom of speech. And so they went to Congress and said, look, we want to do these platforms of freedom of speech, but we don't want to be held liable for anything anyone says. Rightfully so. So Congress granted them what was called Section 230, which basically keeps them from being liable for anything anyone puts on their platform. Well, now you look at social media, and they're suddenly deciding what's good speech and what's bad speech. You start changing the rules on that, we start changing the rules on Section 230, is the way I look at it. The next thing is our social media platforms owe it to all of you to show us their algorithms. Show us why you move what you move. Show us why things come up the way they come up. Show us why things are moved faster than other things. Let us see it. And then finally, those social media companies need to show us what they're doing with foreign bots. There are millions of foreign bots every day. These are not people. These are bots generated by computers that go and put out things that try and divide our country on race and religion and everything else, try and spread misinformation. We already know they're going to be active in this election, in the 2024 elections. Those social media companies owe it to us to show us what they are doing to get that misinformation and those foreign adversaries out of our system. I will fight for freedom of speech of Americans. I am not going to fight for freedom of speech for Hamas or Iran or Russia or China, and that's what's happening right now.
Yes. Last question.
Oh, make it a great one.
So what caught my attention of you was mentioning term limits for Congress, because I was a CNA, I'm also a correctional officer, and so working with individuals of that age, I look at them, I love them, they're all my residents, but I could never see them running a country or someone that age running a country, so that's what I love about you. But you said, like, before, Congress like passed, or not Congress, but state legislature or whatever, passed to give themselves raises. You're going to go to Congress saying, hey, you guys should have term limits, and do you think that's really going to pass? Or like, what do you think is going to, what are your plans to do about it? Then also, like, on the pamphlet, you know, you say you're pro-police. Is there anything you would do to better the law enforcement? Like Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers just gave correctional officers a raise to $33 an hour starting, which I work for Wisconsin now because of that, and I drove 4 hours to be here. So, but I just want to say that I hope you become president.
That was nice.
Well, on behalf of these great people, welcome to Iowa. You know, I'll tell you, first of all, good question on term limits. No, Congress is never going to vote term limits, but that doesn't mean we stop. This is what I'll do. There will be a Haley term limits pledge that everyone has to sign when they file to run for office, whether they're an incumbent or whether there's someone running newly. We'll have that Haley term limits pledge. Either they sign it or they don't sign it, but I'm going to give you all that information so that you know before you vote who was for term limits and who was against term limits. And we will keep doing that until we can get them to vote. Because then when you have enough of them who've come into office signing the term limits pledge, then we can get them to actually pass the term limits law. So that's how we'll do that. In terms of, you can look in my state, we supported law enforcement and we supported corrections officers because that is a tough job. And so the big thing you look at now is what happens when you defund the police. Now everybody realizes you get cities that are on fire, which is what's happening. So we've got to not just say we love the law enforcement, not just say we support corrections officers, do it. You do that by one, making sure they have the equipment they need to be safe. Two, you do it by making sure they're not demoralized by the fact that they can go and put somebody in jail and these prosecutors are letting them out the next day. We've got to make examples of these criminals. If they pay a price, they'll stop doing it. We have to require prosecutors prosecute according to the law because it's not law enforcement that's not trying. It's the fact that no one is on the prosecutors to make them actually pay a price for committing a crime. And I want to tell you one other thing that we did that was interesting with our in our prison system. I was obsessed with how they got in, what we did with them when they were there, and what happened to them when they left. And we basically, I went into maximum security, I went into men's prisons, women's prisons, spent a lot of time, and we reformed the whole system. We basically put in computer skills, we taught them resume planning, we gave them financial planning, we gave them family planning, we gave them faith-based if they were willing to take it. But we put equipment behind the fence, and we taught them a skill. Now in South Carolina, when someone leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. We have the lowest recidivism rate in the country. So I want to thank you. 29 days to caucus. 29 days. Tune out the noise of what the media says because you decide this. And I trust you because I know that you're putting in the thought and the time and the effort to figure this out. So if you like what I had to say today, go tell 10 people. Go tell your family and your friends. Tell them to go to NikkiHaley.com, take a yard sign, get involved. Make sure that you tell them to caucus. Yes, he's holding up these cards. You've got these cards. These cards, there's an option for you to volunteer. There's an option to say, yes, I'm going to caucus for you, all of those things. We can do this. We can do this. And think about the country that we could have. America has an amazing ability to self-correct. Sometimes we have to hit rock bottom to know where up is. This is up. So fill out the card. Make sure they know that. If you don't like what I had to say today, just don't say anything and don't tell anyone you are here. God bless you. Thank you so much.